What's up, guys? Welcome to Fed by Fire. I'm Christian Whitlow. So, tonight we're going to be talking about the David case. And there are some true crime stories where you hear about the allegations and immediately realize this isn't just another celebrity controversy. This is a case involving a 14-year-old girl, a rising music artist, and a relationship prosecutors say was supposed to be kept a secret, kept on the hush hush, and a death that investigators say followed an attempt to conceal what happened. And obviously, he did not do a very good job of covering up his tracks, and today this case took another major step forward. A Los Angeles judge ruled that prosecutors presented enough evidence for David Anthony Burke, better known by his stage name, to stand trial in connection to the death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. But before we get into everything, I want to make something very clear. David Burke, he's pleaded not guilty. Even though he's got to be guilty of sin. Everything's pointing back to you, dude. But everything we're talking about is alleged at the end of the day, and it's it the his everything is alleged actions. It's an allegation made by prosecutors unless I specifically tell you that something has been established in court. A preliminary hearing, I've had a lot of preliminary hearings in my day. It is when they bring all the evidence and see if they have enough to kick up your charges to a higher court, which obviously he did. I don't know why he wasted the fucking taxpayers' money doing a preliminary hearing when you go into the big boy court anyway. It's going to be a trial. In a preliminary hearing, it's not a trial. The judge wasn't deciding whether Burke was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The question was whether prosecutors had presented enough stuff for the case to move forward. And the answer today was exactly yes. So let's go back to the beginning, because to understand why this case has one of the most disturbing celebrity criminal cases in the country, you have to understand who Celeste Rivas Hernandez was and who David was becoming and what investigators say happened behind the scenes. So Celeste was 14 years old, and most 14-year-old girls should be texting boys their age, going to the movies, doing normal shit. But that was not Celeste Rivas. So she had a quiet relationship with David Anthony Burke. He was a young musician whose career was rapidly taking off, and prosecutors allege these two had a full-blown relationship. And that's where the case gets extremely serious, because prosecutors allege that Burke, you know, that they had intercourse. But the thing about them having intercourse is she cannot consent. No matter what her parents say, no matter what, she cannot consent. She is a child still. That their relationship eventually became a threat to his career, though. And according to the prosecution's theory, Celeste had threatened to expose their relationship, and prosecutors say Burke eventually unalived her because he feared what would happen if that relationship became public. That is the prosecution's theory. Proving that theory beyond a reasonable doubt is going to be not very much of a challenge, in my opinion, that prosecutors are facing at trial. But David's defense attorneys, he's spending some money there. They're in for a lot more than they probably bargained for. But we'll see what happens. Money talks, and money, it might get him out of this one. But investigators say that they didn't just find a body. They found a trail of evidence. Celeste's remains were discovered months after her disappearance inside the front trunk of a Tesla connected with, you guessed it, David Burke. Investigators say the condition of the remains indicated that an attempt had been made to conceal the body. During the preliminary hearing, prosecutors presented evidence involving Burke's home, his vehicle, DNA and blood evidence, as well as digital communication and purchases investigators say were connected to an attempt to dispose of human remains. And one of the most disturbing parts of the prosecution's evidence involved items investigators say Burke purchased after Celeste's death, and those items allegedly included a chainsaw, a shovel, a inflatable pool, and body bags. Prosecutors say Burke used an alias when making some of the purchases, but investigators trace the purchases back to him. Now, here's where we have to slow down. Having those items doesn't automatically prove somebody committed a murder, but it damn sure don't look good. The prosecution has to connect they have to connect those purchases, which is not going to be hard to do, to the crime itself, and that's exactly what they're attempting to do. Investigators have also collected evidence from Burke's garage and the Tesla, including material they say was blood or biological evidence. During the preliminary hearing, prosecutors presented forensic testimony about DNA and blood evidence that they say connected to Celeste to locations associated with Burke. The prosecution also presented digital evidence, and this could be one of the most important factors of this entire case. Investigators reportedly recovered thousands of messages between Burke and Celeste, and those conversations are very important because prosecutors aren't just trying to show that these two knew each other, they're trying to establish the nature of their relationship and what exactly was happening between them. And shortly before Celeste's death, and figure out what was happening and what could be a possible motive. And prosecutors say some of these messages showed a lot of conflict between the two of them. Prosecutors say that the relationship became dangerous for Burke because Celeste allegedly threatened to expose him. And if prosecutors can establish that Burke believed his career was in danger and then connect that motive to the physical evidence, the digital evidence, and circumstances surrounding Celeste's death, they believe they can tell a complete story to the jury, and I believe they can too. But there's another important question here. What exactly happened to Celeste? What was her cause of death? Like, we still don't know. There's a lot of unanswered questions. At the end of the day, I pray for her family and I hope she's in heaven. You know, this was a terrible thing to happen to any girl, let alone a child. And prosecutors allege that she was stabbed and that Burke subsequently dismembered her remains. The details presented in court have been disturbing, but there are still questions that will have to be answered at trial. Where exactly did this take place? What happened immediately before it? What happened immediately afterwards? What evidence establishes who caused the fatal injuries? And perhaps most importantly, can prosecutors prove that Dirk intentionally killed Celeste rather than merely showing that he had some connection to what happened afterwards? We'll see. Those distinctions matter enormously in a murder trial because the standard at the trial isn't probable cause, it isn't suspicion, it isn't this looks bad. The standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, you guys, and that's where the defense comes in. And they got a molehill. But Burke's attorneys have argued that the prosecution's case is circumstantial, and that's important. Circumstantial evidence can absolutely be enough to convict somebody, but the defense will have the opportunity to challenge every single piece of it. They can challenge the forensic evidence, they can challenge the interpretation of the text. They can challenge the timeline. They can challenge the prosecution's theory of motive, and they can argue that the evidence doesn't establish Burke's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, but we'll see. At the end of the day, it's been a horrible look. We've been uncovering this case as it's went on, and that's what the trial is ultimately going to be about, you guys. But today wasn't about the trial. Today was about whether the prosecution had enough evidence to get there, and the judge said yes, they did. Burke was ordered to remain in custody without bail. His next court appearance is scheduled for August 31st, and we will be keeping you guys up to date on what's happening there. Now the case moves into the next phase, a trial. And if you're wondering why this case matters beyond just some crazy celebrity angle, I think that it's an important conversation to have, because at the center of this entire story, it isn't music. It isn't a celebrity. It isn't the music industry. It isn't TikTok or any bullshit like that. It's a 14-year-old girl named Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Whatever ultimately happened, we don't know. We don't know how she grew up. Well, and she deserved a lot better, I'd say. She deserved to go to school, to have a normal life, and to have a future. And now a jury is eventually going to be asked to decide whether the man prosecutors accused of taking that future away is guilty. Until that happens, we have to be careful with our language. Sometimes everything here David Burke is accused, is all alleged. He has pleaded not guilty, and he is entitled to that presumption of innocence. And today's ruling means prosecutors will get their chance to present the entire case to a jury, and that means we're probably only at the beginning of the most important chapter of this story. This is Fed by Fire Media. I'm Christian, and as this case moves forward, we're going to be bringing it to you guys, breaking down the evidence, the court proceedings, and the questions that still haven't been answered. Because when you're talking about a case this serious, facts do matter, and Celeste deserves nothing less.